So glad you came back. Integrating group healing practices. We've talked about this when we just mentioned where we're going. But these practices need to mature into not just skills that can be done, but integration going on between the various practices, the healing practices. And we're going to go into and explain this to you. And just to repeat, there's an interplay between these parts, and that growth is not linear, and that they create for people challenges. They're growing, but they don't realize that growth in one area is creating a struggle in another area. And mature communities are really able to watch out for progress in areas. They're able to watch out for pitfalls that might be happening, and things that might be causing a person to falter. And as you end up with more mature individuals, you are able to provide the quality and quantity of relational protection for the less experienced. Everyone plays a role in guiding each other with what they've learned, and you're creating these communities that have deep heart connection because everyone is playing a role protecting. So let's have a look at how this interplay works. Where this really gets tricky when you're introducing new social practices into a group, these all interplay with each other. They're interdependent. And there's a balancing act that you need to be aware of shifts that are taking place. So, for instance, if light you've been in a place of hiddenness and really not honest conversation, and you move along to where light goes up, what tends to happen is identity drops. Now you say, how would identity drop? Well, as the light shines brighter, I see my mess in clearer ways. And I've seen this happen over and over again, where people sort of go, woe is me. You remember when the prophets went into the presence of God and they, woe is me, I'm undone, Isaiah. And God had to come to him and says, you're clean. And there was the rock that was heated in the fire came and touched his lips and says, you're clean. And this identity is needed to handle light. Otherwise, we go off balance. This whole process of balancing is easily enabled by a skilled facilitator who's paying attention to these things. But let me walk you through just the spin-off on other dimensions. So I've got my identity down. I'm feeling not so good about myself because the light is bright. I have a choice. I can either take the light and say, let's turn it off, or I can leave the light on and deal with it in grace. So when my identity drops, when I have a sense of shame or my self-worth is diminished, most people are going to be very agitated and want to do something about it. And what this starts to lead to is me looking at trying to fix myself in some way. Shame is driving me, and I start to I need to find a solution. So the intensity to find a solution to my brokenness or my deeper sense of brokenness that's happening because the light's shining brighter, I want to produce what the Bible calls dead works. But I'm putting out this effort to create a solution, and I can't really create a good solution that deals with shame. It's really a way of hiding, and it just strengthens shame. And so what happens in there is I start to have the shame that I don't have this capacity to fix myself. And that leads me to being broken. But the other part that starts to play around with this, I'm intensely working on a solution. And what happens is I have this option on the table that maybe I need others, but I don't want to pursue needing others. Because needing others means I'm trying to fix myself to overcome shame. I'm trying to create worthiness through what I do. And so I don't want to need others as the path to my healing, because I'm trying to produce my own worth. I'm not receiving worth from others because they love me and accept me, and I'm not doing it. It's like a self-generated dead works. And so these things all interplay. And what you're doing is when you're facilitating the group moving forward, you're really trying to take a large number of tools and bring them to bear and noticing where people are, whether someone is, as they start to experience light, what are they doing? So there really is a job of paying attention, people interacting with each other, being aware, like it says in Hebrews, Be careful lest there be in any one of you an unbelieving heart that causes us to fall away and lose hope. And so we're to encourage one another in this group process of encouraging and paying attention to and helping each other is actually happening around a complex transformational process where we are learning to be open, learning to be vulnerable, learning to deal with shame a different way, learning to tell our story, starting to discover and know myself in deeper ways. And as I discover myself, I don't always like what I see. There's a lot that's going on because we're taking groups out of darkness and into light, and it's a big shift. We're out of trusting ourselves for righteousness to righteousness being produced by God. There's a lot of dynamics that are changing. It's very, very powerful in terms of the spiritual transformation it can achieve. But there is many moving pieces. So the process of shepherding connection, shepherding community to unity, is you're dealing with big issues of the heart, and you have this thing the scriptures calls God nourishes through his people. He brings life, nourishment to us through others. And we start to experience transformation because we're loved, not because we perform. So group norms take time. As individuals and groups grow their capability to know and be known, to love and to be loved by others, the experience of being known, loved, and treasured transforms a group into a place where heart connection and richly experiencing the love of God drives a transformation of the soul. And we have seen this. We have seen people just radically change in their sense of life and vitality. People that are really quiet and reluctant to talk become open and talkative, and they start to express themselves. Just real deep transformation of character. But in terms of what we need to get to is, if you're facilitating groups like this, you need to get to the place where the group has a foundation of strong leadership, group shepherds who can nourish and guide a rich community so it's sustainable over time. So our end goal in doing this is to bring groups to maturity where there is the leadership to lead and guide this. And we've got some processes that we use for doing that, but it needs to be a priority in any program. So in essence, what we're doing here is we are mixing instruction with connection. And by connection, I don't mean we're just talking about ideas together. I'm talking about what the scripture is describing as hearts knit together in love. People experiencing being known in ways where they've always been hidden, their inner life, their struggles, the type of things that where people would say, I've never told anyone this in my life, but they're doing it in our group where high trust, high joy, deep heart connection is being developed and grown. What we have found is that connection is sort of the energy that drives people for growth, but instruction gives them the path they need to walk on. And when you can blend these two together, you achieve a very significant change in people's character. And so this challenge of embedding new practices into a community, into individuals, and integrating these various elements so that it becomes a group capability as well as an individual capability, and at the same time building leadership, it is all blended into the process that we use. And what I want to illustrate is the way we take this instruction and connection and blend it together so that the appeal of attending and being part of the group is really the strong connection, and the instruction is what moves people towards. So we've literally had people come back year after year after year for 7 years, 8 years, 9 years, and sometimes 3, 4, 5 workshops in a year. So we don't do these steady. We typically have been doing them across about a 25 week period, sometimes just 10 weeks. What we're doing now is we are shifting from it being an instruction to equip people with skills to more a permanent development of community. Because what I found is when you get people in this process and they go off and say, okay, I've learned these new skills, they tend to go into a vacuum. So what we are now is building community and growing them. This structure shows you how we can do that. Our process is together. We want to sit and we deal with multiple groups. They can be in the same building, in different buildings. They can be all separate in their homes through Zoom. But we're dealing with, so we've got the groups of groups. the together, and then we have the separate. And during the separate, groups break off, and they generally break it off for 20 minutes to half an hour of discussion. The instruction that happens when we're together is often 10, 15 minutes. So it's short and it's a very simple, clear concept. And then when people get together, they tell their story. The teaching introduces a dimension around which people struggle. Empathy is needed. Protection is needed. Coaching and they need to practice. So they get together in their small groups and they might practice something like getting rid of shame by telling your story. We may teach for 15 minutes how important this is, and then go and a few in the groups typically will tell a story. Some of the ones more experienced will be quite free at it. The ones that are new will be learning. And so you have the socializing of a teaching that takes place. What also happens is we use these symbols, the together symbol and the separate symbol, just to guide the slides. People know what's happening. We hand out notes electronically before the groups get together, so the material is constantly being improved. Each of the separate groups generally have people who are more experienced, more mature as facilitators. You could have facilitator assistants, and so in the small groups, but they're basically giving a teaching with a set of discussion questions so that the groups start talking about it. And in this format, in the small groups, people get to build leadership skills. But when we are together in the larger group, the group of groups, you get interaction that goes between leaders in the groups and as they interact, but you also get people who are becoming more bold and becoming more confident start to express. So you have discussion at the meta level, the high concepts, and what happens with this is the ideas become socially affirmed by multiple people. This is what works. And the feedback we're getting is the socializing of the teaching is way more powerful than the teaching. I do most of the teaching. When they get together and they talk about this, it becomes real to them. And it becomes part of their character. It becomes the way they live. So it's very, very interesting the way this works. So we use Zoom, which allows, we can make small groups out of any people anywhere. So we can pull people together from anywhere. And we can pull them back into a collective. But those small groups could be in a room through Zoom, or they may be in a room that we facilitate multiple breakout groups and together groups in a facility. Or we might broadcast by Zoom into a facility for a multitude of groups to dialogue and get together. And we can mix this up pretty easily. And I think it's extremely scalable. So we're excited about this. So mixing instruction with connection is allowing us to bring a quality of transformation around these social heart practices that violate our culture and develop in people a new heart through the Spirit of God and through God working through his people as we connect together. So next we're going to talk about how do we facilitate this heart-to-heart connection while developing new social practices. We've explained the groups to you a little bit. So in this we're going to go, more learning comes from high-trust interaction than from slow-track conceptual learning. It's just people get it when this is socialized, they tend to get it. Interpersonal neurobiology has discovered that fast-track relational learning is much faster, and it happens when face-to-face with high-trust, joyous interaction. So we have in Scripture, knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. And what it's really telling us is that knowledge by itself doesn't really grow the soul, but love does. And so we're using an environment which has learning, but the dominant thing going on between people is they're learning to love. And so this learning blended with becoming known and knowing each other is an absolutely powerful way. And we're going to explain how we do this in the next video. I hope you can come back and join us. Thank you.